empty the chamber on them. And how do you do that? First 6 seconds, point A to point B, everything you got. Everything you got. Turn that shit up. Let's go.
Welcome to the Scoop World Order. It is November. It is playoff rankings edition. The first rankings have come out. It is always one of the funniest things of the year when you look back and see where guys were ranked in the first playoff and where they end up in the national championship overall picture at the end of the season. But we are here. They were out, so we're going to talk about it a little bit. But first, as always, we are thankful for you guys. We're grateful for you guys. Keep hitting like, keep subscribing, keep spreading the word. Our channel is growing like crazy. It's all thanks to you. We have a nice, smooth month of cupcakes up before a humongous matchup versus the Michigan Wolverines, and we need you guys to keep spreading the word. Appreciate you guys as always. Comment down below. I want to see your top 4. If you were the king of college football and you get to rank the 4 teams in order, how would you rank them? Obviously, there's a humongous matchup between Georgia and Tennessee this weekend. That'll shake up the rankings. Ohio State really is not going to be tested until they see Michigan, so they're going to be kind of floating up there. I don't know if they'll stay at number 1. I imagine this won't be a stretch that the winner of the Georgia-Tennessee game will be number 1 next week, but I've seen crazier things. So with that being said, I'm going to bring in my good friend, Nevadabuck. Nevada, how are you?
Doing great. Ohio State, number 2 in the current college football poll, which is an unbelievable spot to be 8 weeks into the season. Really couldn't ask for much more than that. Obviously, you can't be much higher than other than being number 1. So, season going along great so far. Ohio State well positioned to make a deep run, and I'm excited. I'm excited. And whenever the polls come out, I know it's time to get serious about college football playoff, and it's a great time of the year.
Yeah, and we had a long talk today about scenarios, some of the crazy things, the close game scenario. What if the Georgia-Tennessee game's a last-second field goal? How do you rank those teams? Ohio State, Michigan obviously is really deep into the season. How do you rank those teams if it's a close game? Talk to me a little bit. Do you agree with the top 4 of Tennessee, Ohio State, Georgia, and Clemson at 4? Is there any? Are there any teams you'd switch up? What did you think of the initial ranking?
I thought it was a pretty good job. I mean, I thought, all things considered, you have to take these things with a grain of salt because they're not like a cumulative ranking like we're used to. They're kind of a moment in time ranking. I mean, right now, 2 of those teams, Tennessee and Georgia, are going to play each other. And what's Georgia, like an 8-point favorite in that game? Yet they're ranked lower than Tennessee. So I don't think you can take the things too seriously. Things generally shake out the way that they should. For my initial rankings, the college football committee had it as Tennessee, Ohio State, Georgia, and then Clemson. The only thing that I had different was I had Michigan number 4 and I had Clemson number 5, so I would have swapped those 2. But I think they did overall did a pretty good job. Some of the glaring mistakes down the path, but I thought for the top 4 or 5, they're all kind of where they should be, and like I said, things generally work out the way they should by the end of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I think that as long as they're in kind of the neighborhood of where they need to be at this point in the season, obviously, you got 4 more weeks roughly. You've got the championship games. I mean, there's going to be a lot of shakeup here. I mean, I imagine there's going to be 2 SEC schools, the winner of Ohio State, Michigan, and Clemson. I mean, I think we talked about that. One of the scenarios that you talked about that I thought was extremely interesting. Talk to me a little bit about your scenario where potentially 2 Big Ten teams could make it into the playoff.
Well, I think there's only really one scenario where that works. I mean, there's really only one scenario, and that's where Ohio State and Michigan both go undefeated to the very end, and then Michigan loses a nail biter in Columbus, maybe an overtime game. There's something that comes down to the last second. Could Michigan stay in at number 4 in a scenario like that, given the fact that Ohio State will be number 2, number 1 in the country? Their only blemish would be on the road against Ohio State in that scenario. And we talked about flipping it around, and what if Michigan just barely beat Ohio State? I think Ohio State would be disqualified because they lost a home game, and I don't think it could work in reverse. But I think if Michigan lost a nail biter to Ohio State, you could see 2 Big Ten teams in the playoff, and that's certainly something that could happen. I don't expect it to happen, but when you talk about crazy scenarios, it's not the longest of shots, that's for sure.
Well, given the absolutely monstrous game in Athens, the Georgia Bulldogs versus Tennessee this weekend. What do you see the outcome of that game being? I'm not sure how much you've studied it, but I mean, you've seen both teams play. Obviously, they've played some humongous matchups so far. What do you see the outcome? It's a 3:30 kick. Do you see Tennessee being able to hold off the Georgia Bulldogs in Georgia, or is it going to be something where the champs rise up, win, and then they resume being number one in the country again?
Yeah, I think there's a reason why Georgia's Georgia, and I think they're a level above. And I think Tennessee's got a terrific team, a lot of fun to watch. But I think the dream dies for them this week. I think they lose, and again, well, I don't think it's particularly disqualificative, for Tennessee because their only loss will be on the road at Georgia if they can keep it close. And I do think they'll keep it close. I think it'll be within a touchdown game, and so, it's going to be interesting to see how far they fall after a loss this week to Georgia. And those are always the things that get interesting. When teams lose and they don't make it to their conference championship game, but other teams do that go on to the championship game and then they lose. And, you know, I think those scenarios are always fascinating to me about, are you better off losing and not having to play that one other game where you can get one more look and potentially lose and be knocked out? Or is it better to be, finish second, on the conference side and then kind of slip into the back door? So, lots of interesting scenarios. Obviously this stuff goes out the window when we go to a 12-team playoff because basically at that point it's basically everybody's in the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
And so a game like this Tennessee, Georgia game, certainly takes on some less luster. Not, it doesn't go to no luster, but it definitely takes on less luster because you're not fighting for your playoff life. You're fighting for seeding at that point in time, and that's a totally different dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. This is going to be an outstanding college football Saturday, especially if you're an Ohio State fan, because you get our game against Northwestern at noon, which will be a nice cupcake. Massive 38-point favorites. Northwestern is just absolutely terrible. 3:30, you get the entree of Tennessee at Georgia, which I think that'll be one of the highest viewed games of the season because there really is no competition in that 3:30 slot. And then you have a real interesting game. Alabama going to Death Valley. Brian Kelly's got those guys playing right now. They're 6-2. Started slow, but they're really coming along now. Nevada, is there any shot that if Bama puts it on LSU, they could sneak ahead of Clemson at number 4 next week? Excuse me.
Boy, I don't know if they could slip above them. Clemson would have to have another, one other close game with somebody, and I just don't see any way that you're going to put a one-loss team over an undefeated team, and even with a win at LSU, because LSU 6-2 right now.
Yeah.
So I just, I'm not seeing that scenario, but I'm certainly not, counting Alabama out of the equation yet. They're right there. They always seem to get better as the year goes on. And Saban's going to have that team playing. So I mean, you of all people should know how crazy things. People forget that you were part of a team that lost to an unranked opponent in week 11 and then still managed to make the college football playoff when the college football playoff consists of 2 teams. So, that was a week 11 loss to an unranked opponent. Week eight losses certainly are not going to knock anybody out. Crazy things can happen. Again, in college football, I predicted this year was going to be a nutso year. It hasn't been complete mayhem yet, but maybe this is the week that we see it.
Yeah, and of course you forgot to twist the knife and say it was also at home. It was also senior day. I don't know if you're gonna bring up any girls that didn't want to go to prom with me too in high school or anything like that, but you can twist the knife on me a little bit on that one. But yeah, it's hard to lose. Senior day is one of those things where I hate senior day. I hate the pomp. I hate the rose. I hate running out and giving stuff to your parents because when you come out of that tunnel and you're ready to play, man, you're ready for war and destruction, and you kind of have an altered mental state when you're coming down the tunnel and you got to go play because I mean it is either I'm not trying to be too ridiculous, it's not kill or be killed, but it's one team is going to leave happy and you're going to do everything in your might to make sure that it's your team, but with the senior days, you got to stop and everyone's going to run out of the tunnel and hand roses to their parents and everyone's crying and but you're like, hey, I got to go play a game. I don't have time for it to cry and be emotional and all this other jazz. But Yeah, I was thankful it wasn't a Michigan game. I was thankful that, the one thing that was nice is the ability to redeem yourself up in Ann Arbor as a senior captain after you screw the pooch and lose that game, because I didn't sleep after that game because it was such a bad loss. And in Illinois it was weird. They're unranked. Um, they had some major talent on that team. They had Vontae Davis, who was a top 10 pick. They had Mendenhall, who was a first round pick for the Steelers. They had a ton of defensive guys that got drafted, but their jersey said Illinois instead of Michigan State or Wisconsin, so it gets knocked down a bunch of notches as opposed to if it was more of a typical power brand type team. But it was a talented team. But we shouldn't have lost that game. We didn't play well. We weren't good on offense. We couldn't get those short yardage stops on defense. But again, I don't blame anybody, because again, that year I could never blame our defense, because our defense finished number 1 in total defense in the country. So they kind of carried us. We were kind of the ultimate ground and pound outfit, where we'd run the ball and play really great defense. And so it was just one of those games. Like, I mean, sometimes it's just it's not your night and it sucks, but you find out, and they ended up going to the Rose Bowl and they got waxed by a really good USC team. But yeah, it's going to be interesting coming down the stretch. I think that if you had to project next week's top 4 Nevada, what would you go with?
I think next week you're probably talking about Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, Michigan. That would be my top 4 if I had to guess. And I mean, Michigan and Ohio State, as we talked about, we're pretty much on autopilot. Even though I'm going to give a little tease here. I think this Ohio State game against Northwestern is going to stay inside the spread this week. As crazy as that sounds, just because if you saw how emotional that win was for Ohio State last week at Penn State, I believe in emotional letdowns. I believe that stuff's real. I believe that stuff happens. A letdown. You've got a road game against an outmanned opponent, but they're going to have the grass really long, and it's just going to be a funky game against Northwestern. So I could see that game staying within the 38-point margin. And the good news is Ohio State's so good that you're never really on upset alert, but you're on cover alert. So for you bettors out there, I think I'd be looking for a Northwestern to cover this week against Ohio State, as Ohio State comes off a emotional win against Penn State in Happy Valley and kind of sleepwalks through one in Evanston.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because what did Iowa scored? Like, I think Iowa scored 30 points. They scored 33 last week against Northwestern, which Iowa scoring 3 is like Ohio State scoring 300. It's like that level. It's like the same skew of difficulty, but I don't know. Like, I could totally see it being a sleepy thing. I've played over there. It's arguably the worst. I mean, there's tiers in the Big Ten of stadiums, and Northwestern is absolutely at the very bottom in terms of it just being a sleepy, cold, miserable environment. It'll be very heavily Ohio State fans, because I mean, there's no Northwestern fan that wants to go sit in the cold and watch their team get drubbed to death by the Buckeyes. But I could totally see that. I mean, it's just weird because they are just so bad this year. I mean, it's amazing. A few years ago, we saw these guys. When we had Chase Young, we saw these guys in the Big Ten championship, and they gave us a good fight. And now it's like they've lost all their talent. They have an outstanding first round left tackle, and then everywhere else is just D- across the board. And it'll be fascinating to see if Ryan Day can get these guys up for a game like this after that emotional Penn State win. I'm telling you, this is a challenging month for Ryan, just because these players. Because again, I lived this exact same scenario in 2006 when we were, we beat Penn State, and then we looked at the schedule and it's like, oh God, all we got left is like Indiana and Purdue and Antarctica and like Bowling Green, and that there's nobody that can really touch you until you see Michigan. So I mean, that's kind of where these guys are, because they're gonna play a bad Northwestern team, a bad Indiana team, Maryland. They're kind of all over the place, and then you see the big dogs. You see Michigan at the end of the tunnel. So it's hard. You got to manage these kids. These kids have never had more access points than they do now with NIL and with social media and all that. So everybody's going to want to get at them. Everyone's going to tell them how great they are. So, Ryan and Mickey Marotti got to beat that down. They got to beat that beast back down, because it's tough in this town, man, because everyone's thinking, okay, Michigan, we get through them, national championship, and can we beat Tennessee? Can we beat Georgia? Can we beat Bama? Can we beat Clemson. See, my top four, and I'm just going to be completely insane here because I don't know why I think Clemson, but if Bama wins out at Death Valley, I'll put them at 4, and that might be completely crazy, but I just think that Michigan doesn't really have a signature win. Our signature wins are both for Penn State basically because Notre Dame hasn't turned out to be very good. Um, and I think that Tennessee got the nod at 1 because they beat the reigning Heisman Trophy runner. They beat Bama, they beat Saban, so that carries a lot of cachet. So I don't know. I for some reason there's a sneaking thing where I think Bama somehow gets into this top 4 by the end of the year. I think that sometimes losing is actually a great way to recalibrate your team. I think it makes it a lot easier to motivate these kids once they've had a loss. They can't say, well, coach, well, we're undefeated. How could you be mad at us? How could you be mean to us? Like, no, they actually slipped up, and Tennessee's the number 1 team in the country, and they it took a miracle field goal for them to beat Alabama. So, and Bama was beating them, in the fourth quarter. So it's going to be interesting. Any
Well, let me
final
ask
thoughts?
you.
Good.
Yeah, let me just ask you a question on that. So, where do you think LSU will be ranked this week if they lose to Alabama? Where do you think they'll be ranked?
In the AP poll or in the playoffs? AP
In the
poll.
playoff ball, either
Well,
one.
I would assume they'd probably be, but again, it's all about it's all about the style of loss. If Bama beats them 55-14, then they're going to be
Well, no, just
probably
say just a normal loss, a 3-loss
normal loss.
LSU
I'd say.
team.
I mean, if they're 12ish now, I'd say 20s. I mean, do you think they fall all the way to the poll because they lost to Alabama and Tennessee,
Well, see, and that's my
Georgia?
point. Is that Penn State's 15 right now. So, like,
Yeah.
you talk about a signature win. Michigan at least will have a win over a team that's higher ranked than that LSU team is, and so I think that's what they'll go with. And also, how the thing is, 0 losses versus 1 loss. That's just huge. That's anytime you have that 1 loss, it's just hard to get over that. You're kind of lumped into that category with all those other 1-loss teams. And, I mean, how many times has a 1-loss team made it in over a 0-loss team?
Well, I mean, 14 when we made it in over
Yeah.
Baylor.
Yeah.
That might be it. But that was strictly the eye test. That was strictly our talent. Us beating the tar out of Wisconsin that year.
Well,
But
that was 59-0. That took a 59-0
yeah,
championship, Big Ten champion. I mean, if we win the Big Ten championship 14-0, we don't make the playoff.
absolutely not. No, I know, and that's the part of this is a lot of these guys that are in these meetings, they sit there, they get a little press release that shows all the box scores from all the games, and they don't when they see that Ohio State beat Penn State 44-31, they don't realize how close the game was and how it kind of got away at the end, and they think that must have been a waxing, and they must have because again, like, these games, like, they all kind of melt together by the end of the year, and they just look at the scoreboard and they're like, wow, look at Ohio State, look how bad they beat everybody, and and again, it's just human nature that there's recency bias, and Penn State, they're 15 now, they're only going to climb because they've got Maryland, Rutgers, they're not going to lose the rest of the way, they're not going to make the championship, so yeah, and then they got Michigan State, so Penn State's going to finish as a top 10 team. So that'll be a really nice win for either Ohio State or Michigan as the pollsters are going through the playoff stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at Ohio State, I mean, Ohio State, we've trailed in 8 games. We trailed twice in the second half, right? Notre Dame and Penn State. I mean, we trailed at Penn State with 8 minutes to go.
Oh,
The ESPN, whatever thermometer
yeah,
had
the
it like
seismic scale, yeah.
that had like Penn State like 70% to win the game or 78 or something ridiculous. I mean,
Oh,
that game we were in trouble at Penn State. So like it's not like it's been it hasn't been an easy road or a smooth, this hasn't been a season of domination for Ohio State. We beat the bad teams, and even against some of the bad teams, we got down against Michigan State 7-0 on that pick six, and we had a scoop and score against Iowa. And it's been funny. It hasn't been like a smooth sailing for Ohio State, but we've got so much talent, and we can be there at the end. But we're certainly not. We're not a juggernaut. There's no juggernaut in college football this year, and that's what makes the season so wide open, as far as I'm concerned.
yeah, that's exactly right. There isn't like you look at Georgia this year. If you just compare apples to apples, Georgia this year versus Georgia last year, the number of sacks they have on defense it's literally like night and day because Georgia's pass rush, especially now that they just lost Nolan Smith, who might be the best end in the country, and then you look at all the guys they lost to the NFL last year on defense. I mean that Georgia defense, it's still Georgia. They're still really good, but they're not superhuman like they were last year, where they literally were probably the best defense in college football history last year. So, and again, are they super vulnerable? I don't think so, but it's just a different world when you don't have that talent. But I mean, Tennessee, it's so interesting when you look at the top two offenses in terms of total yardage in the entire country are colliding this week. Tennessee and Georgia are the top two offenses in terms of total yardage. So that's going to be a spectacle. I'm really excited about this game. Nevada, I'm going to wrap this up. Any final thoughts? Also, we saw Ryan Day's presser today. Brian Hartline, Jim Knowles all spoke. Any thoughts on what was going on in the press conferences? Any final remarks from you?
Yeah, just Ryan Day's a little sensitive about any criticism about the running game right now, and which I find really really interesting, because I think the challenges that we're having in the running game are readily apparent to any you don't need to be a super genius or former All-American right tackle from Ohio State to really analyze the fact that we're having trouble running the ball. But he seemed to bristle at any suggestion that we're having any problems. So party on, Ryan. But I hope they get it figured out because we've struggled and we've struggled mightily. So hopefully they can get that figured out, and hopefully that's he's not being myopic or has a blind spot about it, because it needs to improve. And I guess that's my final thought for the week.
Yeah, I mean we're struggling, and again we haven't we played Notre Dame. That was they're decent. Penn State was obviously good. Iowa, but as we ramp up and get to Michigan and into the playoffs, I mean, we're going to see way better defense than those guys, way better athletes, better schemes. So yeah, that's the point of consternation right now. I'm sure that the team's frustrated just because, there's been plays that have been blocked up well where they haven't ran it well, and there's been plays where there looks like there'd be a lane and they're not blocked well. So I'm sure inside the Woody Hayes, that's a big point of contention. I've been there before when you're running. Efficiency isn't where it needs to be. When you're not blocking as well as you need to, you're missing blocks, whatever it is. It stinks. And I've been on teams that were terrible and couldn't run the ball, and it's just like it's frustrating when you're Ohio State and you're an elite program and you can't run the ball versus in Iowa or teams that have much lesser talented players than you do. But those guys are on scholarship too, and hopefully over this month where we're seeing some really bad Big Ten teams that we can get right and get tuned up for Michigan. Because again, like when we were leading into Michigan, I remember we played Illinois out at Illinois, and it was one of those cold, terrible, miserable games, and we won like 10-7. Played terrible, and then we came back and lost the next year, which is again also terrible. Then we played Northwestern, we waxed them, got after them early, and got that game over with. And then we played Michigan, and our offense came out guns blazing, ran the ball all over them, threw the ball all over them, scored 42 versus the number one total defense in the country. So there's time for everything to get fixed up and healed up, and for Ryan to get these guys going. And again, I like when there's a lot of turmoil and strife and guys, because again, if it's all perfect right now, then it's harder for these guys to take criticism. But the players the players are smart. They know that things aren't where they need to be. So it's real easy for these coaches to get after these guys and make sure that they keep moving the ball down the field, so to speak, in terms of getting the offense corrected. Any final thoughts of that? I'll wrap this thing up.
No, just like I said, number two. Very glad that we're being number two. Looking forward to getting through these next three games. We just got to get through these next three games, avoid any type of injury or any type of craziness. That Maryland game kind of looms large before the Michigan game. You want to think the unthinkable, but you just check these boxes one at a time. And I can't wait for the Michigan game. I wish it was tomorrow.
Yeah, I do too. Well, we're gonna wrap this thing up. As always, the best place to find us is BuckeyeScoop.com. We are grinding on the message board. Tons of good content. The best community by far. Thank you, any of you guys that are a part of the Buckeye Scoop Premium community. Just a fantastic group of people, just some of the smartest, brightest, best Ohio State supporters, alumni. I mean, everything you got. We have people from every level of the university that belong to our board. Sometimes I'm shocked when I look at our database and see some of our subscribers. A lot of them are anonymous, but appreciate you guys. Give me your top 4 for your current playoffs, and give me your top 4 projected for the end of the season, with the last few weeks playing out, including the conference championships. I always like to see how accurate you guys can be, but I appreciate you guys. Big commitment yesterday. Caden McDonald is in the fold. Beat Clemson out on him, so we got a big D tackle from Georgia. Can't get enough of those guys on the roster, so we had a bunch of content on that yesterday on the Scoop. But appreciate you guys as always. BuckeyeScoop.com. Let's rock. Ready to roll. Appreciate you guys. The Scoop family, thank you guys as always. Buckeye Nation, thank you guys. Big march to Michigan. The Bucks they're coming, baby. Can't wait to see them. So you guys have a great rest of your day. Go Bucks.